What is the aim of a Sufi mystic?
A Sufi is centrally and basically concerned with his awareness of God as one and only and singular reality.
What does that mean in practical terms? To be aware of God as one.
First, to deny in terms of his verbal testimony and say consistently that there is no God but God. And then to incorporate the testimony in practice, namely of worship, of contemplation. And then the most important is to have in his state of mind and heart that sense of oneness.
How can a human being be one with God?
Karen, when we say a human being, we presuppose an individual, a fragment, a broken piece. But when mystics talks of humanity, they talk of a continuum, which is one, which transcends time and space. And in that sense, the humanity 2,000 years ago is one with the humanity today.
So, in a sense, individuality could become extinct in the mystical experience. Can a human being want to be extinct in God?
Well, these are the most well-known stages in Sufi discipline. One is to apprehend the tremendous unity, the ultimate, and then to get lost into that ocean of being.
To get lost?
And then that is not the end.
Ah.
And then when he returns to the world, he obtains a new individuality. And this we consider as Baqa. The first was Fana, and the second one is Baqa.
Now, Fana means?
To be annihilated in God.
To almost, as in Christian terms, to die to yourself and to live in God. As Paul says, I don't live anymore, but Christ lives in me. One could say that of God too, as well as of the Christian mystic.
Yes, the prophet once said, die before you die.
Yes.
And this dying to one's own ego, one's own world, is to rise into a new life. And this life is one wherein we have both an individual and a trans-individual reality.
Now, this we're obviously talking about a very difficult state of awareness to achieve. Obviously, the mystic believes that God helps him, but he must help himself. Every mysticism has its own disciplines. Meditation is common to them all. But Sufism has some very special mystical disciplines. I think we all know very vaguely about the Whirling Dervishes, but we don't really know what happens at a ceremony. What happens when the dervishes whirl?
Well, before we talk about the Whirling Dervishes, I would say we should for some time concentrate on the basic Sufi practice of Zikr. Zikr is simply speaking, remembering God in his attributes, in his mercy and power and love.
And what do you speak?
Sometimes we just recite a particular Quranic text. Sometimes a particular name of God is recited. The most beautiful name of mercy, which is a compound name which includes compassion, which is universal, and mercy, which is very particular to those who love God. And we say, Ya Rahmanu, Ya Rahimu, Ya Rahmanu, Ya Rahimu, Ya Rahmanu, Ya Rahimu, O the compassionate, O the merciful.
And for how long?
It depends. Sometimes people go on without counting, and sometimes they recite a particular number as prescribed by the master. But the basic zikr, the basic recital is, if I say it in Arabic, Karen, it would sound Alhamdulillah. Well, it is difficult to recite in Arabic, particularly in response to a question. But the zikr consists of a recital which brings into unity all Islamic dimensions of spirituality. It sounds, if I recall it properly, Subhanallahi, walhamdulillahi, wa la ilaha illallah, wallahu akbar.
And what?
To translate it, if you don't mind, because it's something which is...
Yes.
I translate it from the end of the recital, and then we go upward. We remember that God is the greatest, and thereby we deny everything else as great. And then we say that He is one, there is no other. And then we say the praise. And then we say, He is sublime, He is above all we say about Him. So the ultimate goal of zikr is to transcend zikr itself. A recital, a true recital is one where it is left behind.
And you transcend the doctrinal formula and attain the reality.
Yeah, doctrine is left behind. I mean, doctrine is a conscious, individual statement of one's own form of belief about the ultimate. And this doctrine has nothing to do with experience.
What happens when the dervishes whirl?
The dervishes constitute a particular Sufi order.
Like an order of monks, equivalently.
No. Most of them lead normal life, and they don't live in a monastic house. They would just come to a particular evening, Thursday evening, usually. And then they enter into the whirling dance. And this was originated by the famous Sufi Rumi as a spontaneous leap into a new form of awareness. And then his son perfected the dance.
When you say leap, was it a physical leap at the same time as a poetic leap into a new form of
The physical leap is an embodiment of the internal leap. There is no preparation involved to enter a whirling dance. A spectator at one point may enter it.
Spontaneously?
Yes.
Now, is this, because a trance-like condition is achieved, is this the end of the mystical process? Is the Sufi now, as he whirls in ecstasy, is he now lost in God? Or is this a way of achieving inward concentration? Is it a means, perhaps, for recollection?
It is both a means and an end, because in the moment of that dance, wherein one becomes empty,
empty of oneself,
a mediation between the heaven and the earth. Man is a mysterious being. In him converge the material and the spiritual. And the dance becomes a purification of that bridge, which man is. It is in this aspect of man being a middle creation.
So that he's using his body to help the transit of his soul.
Even the body disappears. For the dancer, there is nothing. For the spectator, there are people who are dancing, going through one movement after the other. But for one who is in the circle, he has disappeared. He has become absent. And one for whom he entered into dance is now present.
Now, this whole idea of absolute disappearance and absolute unity with God could seem to an ordinary believer rather blasphemous. How can any of us dare to say that we are one with God? I know certain Christian mystics, I'm thinking of the great mystic Meister Eckhart, got into great trouble with the Christian authorities for making a claim to say that mystically he was one with God. Have the Sufis had any trouble?
Yes, I mean, this is basic to the entire religious history of man. Whether we take Islam or Christianity or Judaism or any other religious culture, we have a very sharp and intense conflict between the outward and the inward, the orthodox and the mystical.
Are the very different dogmas of the various religions an obstacle to mystical truth, or are they in fact different paths towards it?
Dogma is an embodiment of a particular theological crisis and how it was resolved at a given time in the history of religious thought. There are creeds in Christianity and creeds in Islam which represent those crises in theological thought. But religious life is far ahead of dogmatic statement. For instance, when I stand in prayer, I don't say that here stands a Muslim with a particular belief statement on his lips. So in ritual prayer, we don't enact the dogmatic. What to speak of the mystical, where the dogma is left behind.
This is a rather similar experience to the one St. Thomas Aquinas had when he wrote his great theological work, the Summa Theologica. He dictated the last sentence and then laid his head down on his hands, and the scribe asked him what was the matter, and he said, "Everything that I have written is straw compared to what I've seen." I think that's the essential difference, that while theologizing might be going on, it is independent and inadequate to express the real religious experience.
Yes, I think this is the most challenging dimension of word and vision, of saying and seeing. In very high levels of religious life, the word becomes an eye, and thereby we obtain a new sense, a new vision, but not with the physical eye, not with the eye of the body.
Nor with the eye of the simply rational mind.
No. The rational mind is only analytical. It doesn't give us a totality. One needs an intuition, a sense of partaking in the wholeness of being. Then perhaps we arrive at the level of true words, which are also true visions.
But dogma, for many religious people, is of the essence of religion, far more than any mystical quest. There are a lot of people, for example, who go to church or to the mosque or to the synagogue once a week, using it perhaps rather like a filling station to get a little bit of spirituality for the week. They believe in the creeds and doctrines of the church or religion to which they belong. Is there an essential divide between these people and mystics who go beyond doctrine?
In terms of analysis, I should say that the dogma is more a matter of institutional identity, continuity, and solidarity in any religious life whatsoever. Whereas the mystic is concerned with the religious person, the individual. If man becomes alone before God, then he becomes a truly religious person.
Now, I'm sure that mystics of all religions can talk to one another very happily. I'm sure, for example, that if the author of that 14th century mystical text, The Cloud of Unknowing, had had a chance of speaking to a Buddhist or to a Sufi at that time, they would have been in very close agreement. Now, this is surely, I think, a very disturbing thing for a lot of religious people to think of, that perhaps at the higher reaches of religion, there is no difference. For your ordinary believer, there's a huge divide between Buddhism or between Christianity and Islam. One's the true religion and one is a false religion. Are you saying that there's no real difference between the two religions?
I am not, in a sense, not really concerned with the question in terms of an absolute division, but at the same time deeply concerned, because on one hand I feel and I know and I notice the unity of religious experience transcending image and symbol and dogma and institution and culture and language. And on the other, I notice a variety, a diversity, a differential dynamics, both between religions and within one particular religion. And therefore, I have to affirm the mystical value of diversity.
So that, in a sense, perhaps you could say that God is so great that he cannot confine the revelation of himself to any one cultural or even religious form. So, is that what you mean?
Yes, I would say that if we who say that we believe in God, who is sublime and infinite and transcendental and almighty, how could that God be equated with one form of one religious belief?
So we must perhaps sit loose to the dogmas or creeds of our religions. Perhaps people who have a mystical ambition is the wrong word, but who would like to be mystics, should abandon Christianity or Buddhism as absolute forms.
Well, I would say, Karen, that one should take one's own religious form seriously, because one is familiar with that form, with the resources of that religious form. If you are born in Sweden, you are familiar with a Christian, Protestant framework, and you should take the framework very, very seriously. But I look forward for a development that from out of that framework one grows into a dimension and becomes one with the other.
Can anyone become a mystic and have a mystical experience?
Every man, every woman is potentially a mystic. It is more a matter of moving from a state of sleep to a state of awakening. Sometimes people are awakened by shocks and by suffering and by disease, whereas the mystical awakening is more conscious and more long-lasting.
So some people can be shocked into an awareness of God by suffering.
By suffering, by accident, by catastrophe, personal or historical. Sometimes a very vast number of people could be thrown into a mystical state by an event as mighty, as catastrophic, say, of a war, or the very fear of war, a nuclear holocaust, is turning mankind to ask for and to reach for a certain mystical, transmaterial understanding of one's own destiny, Therefore, I should say that the mystical is the destiny of every man, because in his very constitution, he's a mystical being.
So that perhaps we're thinking in the future about a new universal religion of mystical experience.
As a matter of fact, for the last 100 years, we have been using the concept world religion at that basic mystical level. Because there is a world religion, namely the mystical. And that is presupposed in all world religions. We enlist from east to the west. But in the 21st century, what form it will take, it is unpredictable.
Now,
if somebody would have asked Aristotle or any other great Greek philosopher that there would be a religion called Christianity after 300 years, he would have just wondered, how could we restrict the freedom of God to speak again and to speak differently in different religions?
Now, would you perhaps say that a lot of the churches are having a lot of trouble with their dogma at the moment? They're seeing that perhaps the way the creeds and doctrines are expressed are an outmoded form of thought. Would you say that people who just cling to the creed and say Christianity is the right religion and Buddhism is the wrong religion are wrong in their religious approach?
I would say that they are ignorant. They are not really working out all the implications of believing in God. How could God speak to a particular culture?
Of course.
Once for all, and then refuse to give some sign of his presence, of his mercy and love to another culture, another country?
If we can finally liberate ourselves from this kind of narrow and perhaps petty dogmatism of religion, what kind of joy do you see us achieving religiously?
I made a simple discovery some 20 years ago in India that my religion was one among many. And then my journey began, and now I feel at home in a church or a synagogue or a mosque. And a man of God should feel at home wherever one is. And I should also say that a man of God is never alone. The invisible companion, the invisible friend, is always there. And then we transcend the names. For instance, if I introduce you to somebody in a party, that here is Karen and she's a Christian, immediately the person, if he happens to be a non-Christian, places you in a box and refuses to notice you as a person, as an individual, with a tremendous potentiality in terms of a spiritual journey. So,
joy is freedom from these boxes.
Yes, I mean, and this freedom has to be earned every moment. It is a very difficult process because still the weight of culture, of identity, of language is so much upon all of us every moment that we are tempted to define, to judge, to identify, to isolate. And then we use the same mechanism for ourselves, and then we suffer, and that joy is lost. I am grateful that in the West today there is a breakthrough due to several reasons, post-dogmatic, post-war, that I see both empirical and spiritual evidence of a new breakthrough. The West is perhaps becoming the mystical East. God knows better.